I thought tonight would be just another Airbnb stay. Nothing special, just a quiet night in a city I barely knew. The streets were empty, the buildings silent, and I expected solitude. Stepping inside, though, the air felt heavier than it should, thick with an anticipation I couldn't place, like the apartment itself had been waiting for me. My shoes were lined up by the door, identical to how I left them at home, and a chill ran down my spine at the impossible familiarity. I dropped my bag on the bed, noticing a steaming mug on the table, exactly like the one I had packed, as if someone had placed it intentionally. Shadows leaned toward me in corners, bending slightly in ways my eyes couldn't follow, and I froze, feeling eyes in every crevice of the room. The kitchen hummed a faint tune I didn't recognize, but the notes felt strangely familiar, echoing something I had whistled days ago without realizing it. A sticky note on the counter read, "Welcome back," written in my handwriting, while I had never touched a pen since leaving home. My phone buzzed with a notification from my own number, blank message, no sender, and my pulse jumped as I realized it wasn't a mistake. The TV flickered on by itself, static fuzz covering images that seemed to show me moving through rooms I hadn't entered yet. Something scratched at the bedroom door, soft and deliberate. I opened it slowly, finding nothing, but the bed was made perfectly, folded exactly as at home. The mirror reflected me perfectly until I blinked and saw a sixth hand resting casually on the dresser, blending with the shadows before vanishing. The apartment air grew colder, each step I took echoed by soft footfalls behind me, whispers threading around the walls, yet the space remained empty. I checked the closet. Clothes hung normally except one jacket zipped halfway, slouched on the hanger, as if someone invisible had just stepped out. A door I hadn't noticed before in the hallway stood ajar, my name faintly etched in dust, a message only I could read. I reached for the doorknob, and it moved slightly under my hand, though no wind or touch existed, beckoning me inside. The room beyond was empty, except for a chair facing the corner, where a shadow pulsed and stretched, bending geometry impossibly in the dim light. I stumbled back as the hallway stretched longer than possible, corners folding over themselves, and my stomach knotted in confusion and fear. The ceiling lights flickered again, shadows spelling words I didn't want to read. "You belong here." And I pressed my palms to my face, rooted in panic. My phone buzzed. "Look behind you." The mirror reflected someone standing there, my exact face, smiling faintly in a way that was almost alien. I ran to the living room, finding the sofa cushions twisted into a spiral, a geometry impossible for human hands to form, drawing my gaze into dizzying patterns. Something moved just beyond the hallway corner, quick, silent, teasing me without revealing form, an anticipation I couldn't ignore. I grabbed a chair and advanced toward the shadow, which recoiled just enough to toy with me, never fully taking shape, always merging with walls and darkness. The front door rattled, and I ran to it, keys in hand, only to find the hallway had become an endless loop, folding impossibly, trapping me in the apartment. Every object I brought, mug, phone, had rearranged subtly, as if the room knew my habits and was learning me, anticipating each reaction. I shouted for help, but my voice overlapped unnaturally with itself, creating a chorus that twisted my stomach and blurred the air with sound. My reflection now held multiple versions of me, each moving differently, smiling when I wasn't, whispering secrets I couldn't catch, bending my mind further. I tried to leave again. The door opened to another hallway, then another, each indistinguishable, folding in impossible ways until I realized the apartment had become infinite. I turned a corner, and my keys were back in my hand, though I hadn't left the room. The mug floated slightly, inviting me to drink as if it knew I would. The walls pulsed, alive with subtle movement. The apartment was rewriting itself to reflect me, mimicking thoughts before I even had them, reshaping reality to its own rhythm. Spiked away, heart hammering, seeing the shadow step forward fully human, fully me grinning with perfect, alien familiarity. I ran, tripping over my own feet, the apartment twisting, doors folding into walls, ceilings bending down, till I stumbled outside, gasping into cold night air. Behind me, the building looked normal, calm, no distorted geometry, no shadows. Only a single light flickering in a top-floor window, as if waiting for me. I never returned. Sometimes, late at night, I see my own reflection in Airbnb windows across the city, waiting, smiling, already knowing me. I was just heading back to my apartment after grabbing some late-night food. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have stood out about that moment at all. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering just enough to make the shadows along the walls feel unstable, like they weren't staying where they should. As I walked past the stairwell door, I noticed it wasn't fully closed. It was just slightly ajar, leaving a narrow strip of darkness spilling out into the hall. Something about it felt deliberate, like it hadn't been left that way by accident. I slowed down without meaning to, my eyes fixed on that gap as I passed, feeling that subtle pull of curiosity that doesn't feel dangerous until you've already stepped too far in to turn back. There was a sign on the door warning that rooftop access was locked after hours. I clearly remembered reading it earlier, which made the fact that it was open now feel wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I stopped completely, standing there longer than I should have, listening for any kind of movement beyond the door. It felt like it was waiting. I pushed the door open. The metal hinge let out a long, dragging creak that echoed up the stairwell. The stairwell itself was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb above, casting shadows that stretched downward along the steps instead of upward, bending in a way my eyes struggled to follow. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, just step up, check the rooftop for a second, then come right back down and forget I ever saw the door open in the first place. Like the air was pressing down on me the higher I climbed, thickening in a way that made it harder to breathe. By the time I reached the top, the rooftop door was already open, swaying slightly on its hinges as if someone had just passed through moments before I arrived. I stepped outside slowly. For a moment, everything felt normal, just another rooftop, just another quiet view above the city. They just stood there, like they had been in that exact position for a long, long time. The distance between us felt longer than it should have been, like the space itself wasn't consistent. The wind picked up suddenly, but instead of sounding like moving air, it carried something softer, almost like a whisper that didn't form words but still felt directed at me. I took a step closer, trying to get a better look at their face, but the darkness clung to it no matter how I moved. I raised one arm slowly, pointing out toward the city, not at anything specific, just into the distance where the lights blurred together. I followed the direction without thinking, scanning the skyline for anything unusual, but nothing stood out. When I looked back, they were closer. The distance between us had shortened without me hearing or seeing them move at all. I stepped back, my foot scraping against the rooftop louder than it should have. They tilted their heads slightly, a slow, off-kilter movement that didn't match the rhythm of anything human I'd ever seen. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out right, like the air between us wouldn't carry sound properly. Behind me, the rooftop door creaked softly, just enough to pull my attention back to it for a second. but something moved in the reflection of the door's small glass window. It was inside the stairwell, deeper in the darkness, perfectly still, facing outward like it had been waiting there the entire time. I turned slowly, trying to keep both in view, but the one on the rooftop hadn't moved, and the one inside hadn't moved either. They were both facing me in exactly the same way. The door was closed now, locked, the sign still in place exactly how it should have been. But through the small wired window, the stairwell light flickered faintly. The person watching from across the street every night. It started with a sense of being observed, a prickling on the back of my neck late at night. Like someone's eyes were quietly measuring me from across the street. I first noticed movement when the streetlights glared through my window and something dark paused near a neighbor's driveway, staying perfectly still, almost impossible to see, but impossible to ignore. At first I assumed it was a neighbor returning home late, someone walking their dog, or a delivery driver who had stopped for a moment. But night after night, the same figure appeared, always at the same time, around 3 in the morning, standing across the street, never moving, only staring toward my house. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, keeping curtains drawn and lights off, yet the figure seemed to appear earlier and linger longer each night. Neighbors began commenting online about strange shadows, quiet silhouettes, and movement outside their homes, none of which could be explained by cars or pedestrians walking past. I started keeping a camera pointed at the street, and for the first time, I captured something unmistakable. A person standing rigidly, head tilted slightly, watching the houses across the road. The figure wore dark clothing that blended perfectly into the shadows, making it impossible to distinguish features. But something about the posture felt deliberate, patient, and completely human. Weeks passed and the sightings continued, the figure always appearing in exactly the same place, never approaching, never leaving notes, simply watching silently from a distance that felt much too close. I asked neighbors if they had seen anyone, but most claimed they hadn't noticed anything, or dismissed it as a stray passerby or someone jogging at night. One night, my dog began growling lowly at the window, staring fixedly toward the figure across the street, refusing to move or settle despite repeated calls and commands. I tried turning on the porch light, hoping it would drive them away. But the figure didn't flinch, didn't move, only continued to stare as though waiting for something to happen. Security footage revealed movement along the street prior to the figure appearing. Shadows shifting as if others were lurking nearby, yet no one ever approached the houses or made a sound. The figure didn't always stand alone, appeared at the corner, distant enough to blur in the streetlight, but clearly keeping watch along the same line of sight. Neighbors began installing cameras and motion lights, but the presence persisted. The quiet tension building as each night the figure returned to the same spot with unwavering consistency. One evening, I noticed the figure had shifted slightly closer, standing near the edge of the sidewalk, making the distance between me and whatever was observing dangerously small. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? Person standing across the street, not moving, not threatening, only staring in silence, was perfectly within their legal right to exist there. The unease grew heavier, the nights longer, and sleep became impossible, with each creak outside feeling like confirmation that someone was still there, waiting, watching, counting the hours, until I awoke. One morning, Neighbors reported seeing the figure pacing along the street before freezing in place outside a different house, mimicking the same silent observation pattern. Videos circulated online showing the figure turning slightly, head moving in slow increments, scanning multiple houses as if keeping a ledger in the shadows, every movement deliberate, measured, and haunting. It became impossible to ignore the pattern. The figure never entered any homes, never interacted, but the psychological impact was undeniable, stilling constant fear and tension in every house along the street. Some theorized a stalker, others a neighborhood prank, while a few whispered about something more sinister, a presence that observed patterns and waited patiently to exploit any vulnerability. The figure eventually returned nightly to my street, always in the same position, a shadow across the road becoming a ritual of unease, a silent predator with no apparent prey. Neighbors began leaving cameras pointed outward, lights on timers, and doors double-locked, yet the figure remained unaffected, a ghostly observer testing boundaries without ever breaking them. At one point, I noticed the figure was no longer alone. A second appeared across the next street, standing in perfect alignment with the first. Like a coordinated survey of the neighborhood, every night the ritual repeated, observers visible through streetlight glare. Each movement calculated, never rushing, never approaching, always patient, turning the neighborhood into a stage for some unseen, unknowable performance. The figure's presence forced families to avoid the streets at night. Jogging routines disappeared, children slept with lights on, and the quiet sense of safety vanished entirely from our neighborhood. One night, the figure finally walked slowly along the curb, then froze directly in line with my porch, tilting its head as if inspecting details, then retreated to its usual spot silently. Neighbors started reporting similar figures appearing on streets nearby, each maintaining the same posture, the same observation pattern, giving the impression that multiple people were engaged in a deliberate, coordinated watch. The street became a place of quiet terror, each night a reminder that someone, or many, were observing everything from a distance, leaving no evidence beyond the oppressive feeling of being watched. Even now, months later, the figure continues to appear, always across the street, always patient, never approaching, yet every night reminding me that some presences only exist to watch and wait. I booked the place late, just needing somewhere quiet to stay for the night. Nothing special, just a cheap Airbnb on a street that felt too empty for a city this size. The listing said entire unit, and the host promised privacy, which was all I wanted. A place to sleep and reset before heading out early the next morning. When I got there, the front door was already unlocked, just slightly open, like someone had stepped inside seconds before me and hadn't bothered to close it. I hesitated, listening, expecting movement, voices, anything at all, but the hallway beyond stayed silent. The kind of silence that feels deliberate instead of empty. Inside, the lights were on, warm and steady, and for a moment it felt normal. Like maybe the host had just finished cleaning and left in a hurry. Then I noticed the second pair of shoes by the couch, worn, slightly damp, positioned like someone had just taken them off and planned to come back. I checked the listing again on my phone, making sure I hadn't booked a shared space. But it still said the entire unit was mine, no mention of anyone else. A faint sound came from deeper in the apartment. A soft shifting noise, like fabric brushing against itself, then nothing again, as if it had stopped when I listened. But the words seemed to sink into the walls without echo, without response. The kitchen looked recently used, a plate in the sink still wet, a glass half full, condensation running slowly down the side like it hadn't been sitting long. I stepped further in, telling myself it was nothing, maybe a mistake. Maybe the cleaner hadn't finished, but the feeling in my chest kept tightening. A phone charger was plugged into the wall near the couch, the cable stretched toward the cushion, like someone had been sitting there not long ago. I checked the bathroom next, pushing the door open slowly, half expecting to find someone inside. But it was empty, the mirror fogged slightly like from a recent shower. Back in the hallway, I noticed one of the bedroom doors was closed, the handle turned slightly downward, not fully shut. Just enough to suggest movement had stopped recently. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, waiting for it to move, for someone to come out and explain everything. Instead, the handle lifted slowly on its own, just a fraction, then settled back into place with a soft click.